The clinking of his glass against another sounded like a tiny, triumphant bell. I watched him from across the living room, the center of a laughing circle of his colleagues, and felt a familiar, dull ache settle behind my ribs. He was telling a story about a hostile takeover, his hands gesturing with the sharp, confident motions of a man who believed the world was his to conquer. Our living room was filled with the warm, expensive scent of catered food and a dozen different perfumes. Everyone was polished, shining with the kind of casual wealth that felt like a costume I was still learning how to wear. I'd spent the day making sure every surface gleamed, that the wine was the right temperature, that the music was a low, sophisticated hum. I was the silent architect of his perfect evening. Then, David, one of his senior partners, drifted over to me. He had kind eyes but the same predatory smile as the others. "Makla, you've outdone yourself. Alex is lucky to have you." I gave him the small, practiced smile I reserved for these nights. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." "I don't think I ever asked," he said, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass. "What did you do before you were wrangling this master of the universe?" He winked toward Alex. A small, genuine warmth spread through my chest. It was rare that anyone asked about my life before Alex. I was an art historian. My master's is in 17th century Dutch portraiture. David's eyebrows lifted in genuine interest. "No kidding, that's fascinating. My wife would love to." But he never got to finish his sentence. Alex, with the uncanny social radar of a shark, had noticed my conversation. He broke from his circle and slung an arm around my shoulders, pulling me into his side. The smell of his cologne was overpowering. "What are you two whispering about?" he asked, his voice booming with forced cheer. "I was just telling David about my degree," I said softly. Alex laughed. It wasn't a warm sound, it was a performance. Loud, sharp, and designed to draw an audience. "Oh, that," he said, squeezing my shoulder a little too tightly. "You're boring him, darling." He turned to David, his smile widening. "She has this adorable little degree. It's framed and everything, cost me a fortune." The men from his group drifted closer, sensing a new topic for amusement. "She can tell you everything you'd ever want to know about some dusty old painting," Alex continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's her passion project, her expensive hobby." The word hobby landed like a stone in my stomach. All those years, the all-nighters in the library, the thrill of archival research, the painstaking work of my thesis, he had just reduced it all to a quaint little pastime, like knitting or collecting stamps. Someone chuckled. Emboldened, Alex went on. "Honestly, it's a good thing she has me. She can tell you the difference between a Rembrandt and a Vermeer, but God forbid she has to balance a checkbook. That's what I'm for." The circle of men erupted in laughter. It was a wave of sound that pushed all the air from my lungs. I felt my face burn, a hot, prickling wave of shame. I looked at their smiling, oblivious faces and felt utterly, completely exposed. He had mocked me. In my own home. In front of people whose respect he craved, he had offered me up as a light-hearted sacrifice. I saw David's kind eyes flicker with a moment of pity before he, too, joined in the polite laughter. It was easier than defending the host's wife. I don't remember how I got through the rest of the evening. I think I smiled. I think I refilled glasses and cleared plates. But I was hollowed out, a ghost in my own house, haunted by the echo of their laughter. The last guest finally left just after midnight. The silence that fell in the wake of the closing door was heavier than any sound had been all night. Alex was humming, energized by the success of his party. He loosened his tie as he walked into the kitchen. Well, that went perfectly. David was practically eating out of my hand. I stood by the window, staring at my faint reflection in the dark glass. I could see the city lights twinkling behind the ghost of my own face. "Why would you do that?" My voice was quiet, barely a whisper. "Do what?" He was already pouring himself a glass of water, his back to me. He hadn't even noticed the storm inside me. "Why would you say that?" "About my degree." He turned, leaning against the counter, and sighed. It was the sigh of a man burdened by an overly emotional woman. "Oh, come on, Makla. It was a joke. A little one, don't be so sensitive." "It wasn't a joke, Alex. It was humiliating." "Humiliating? For who?" "Everyone had a good time." He took a long drink of water, his eyes cold and dismissive over the rim of the glass. "You made my life's work sound like a joke. Like something a child would do." It's not your life's work, is it? He said, setting the glass down with a sharp clink. Your life's work is this, us, our home. My career supports all of this. What does your degree support? A nice conversation piece at a dinner party I have to pay for. The cruelty of it was so casual, so effortless. He refused to see the wound he'd inflicted. He refused to even acknowledge it was a wound at all. I want you to apologize, I said, my voice trembling slightly. He actually laughed again, a short, incredulous bark. Apologize? For what? For telling the truth? Honey, we live in the real world. A degree in art history doesn't pay the mortgage. My job does, that's just a fact. I'm not sorry for stating a fact. He walked past me, patting my shoulder as if I were a pouting child. Go to bed. You're just tired. But I didn't go to bed. I waited until I heard the shower running, and then I walked down the hall to my small study. It was the one room in the house that was truly mine. The walls were lined with books. The air smelled faintly of old paper and ink. On the wall, in a simple black frame, was my master's degree. The university crest, the elegant script, my name printed in bold letters. It had always been a source of quiet pride. A testament to a part of myself that had nothing to do with being Alex's wife. My fingers trembled as I took it down from the wall. The glass was cool against my skin. I looked at my name, at the words that had defined so much of my identity. He called it adorable, a hobby. I slid it out of the frame. The heavy parchment felt fragile in my hands. I walked to the deep closet at the back of the room, the one where I stored old winter coats and things I didn't want to look at anymore. I placed the degree inside an old portfolio case, behind a stack of forgotten sketches. As I closed the closet door, the click of the latch sounded final, like a lock turning on a part of myself. That's when I realized the laughter hadn't just filled a room. It had begun to hollow out my life. The next morning, the house was silent. Alex had left early, a single, sterile note on the kitchen island. Late meeting tonight, don't wait up. No apology, no acknowledgement, just business as usual. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the table, the silence pressing in on me. The lingering smell of stale wine and perfume from the party felt like an accusation. I looked around at the pristine, impersonal space Alex had designed. It was a showroom, not a home. Everything was shades of gray and chrome, a perfect reflection of his world, cold, functional, and devoid of the messy, vibrant colors I had spent my life studying. Was he right? The question lodged itself in my mind, a toxic little seed. Had I wasted all that time, all that money? My parents had been so proud, taking out a small loan to help me through my final year. I remembered my father, a mechanic with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, holding my thesis. He couldn't understand the dense academic language, but he'd traced the title with his finger and said, "You worked hard for this, honey. You made something." Now, the memory was soured by Alex's casual dismissal. He made more in a month than my father made in a year. By his logic, his opinion was the only one that held any real weight. I felt a creeping shame. I had defended my passion to my practical, blue-collar family, assuring them it had value beyond a paycheck. And now, I was married to a man who saw no value in it at all. He saw me as an extension of his success, and the parts of me that didn't fit that narrative were inconvenient flaws. I spent the day drifting through the empty rooms like a ghost. I'd catch my reflection in a mirror and see a stranger staring back, a well-dressed woman with a sad, lost look in her eyes. This wasn't the person I'd been at university. That woman was fierce, curious, and alive with ideas. She would argue for hours about the political implications of a single brushstroke. Where had she gone? I told myself it didn't matter. This was my life now. I had a beautiful home, a successful husband. I was supposed to be happy. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. I am happy. I am lucky. But the words felt like lies. 2 weeks after the party, the silence between us had become a permanent feature of our marriage. We moved around each other with a polite, careful distance. He talked about his work, the market, his team, the latest deal. I would nod and ask the right questions, playing my part, but I never talked about my world anymore. I stopped mentioning a new book I was reading or an interesting documentary I'd watched. My interests had been publicly tried and found wanting. They were worthless currency in his kingdom of finance. The small cuts continued. One Saturday, I was curled on the sofa, lost in a book about the life of Artemisia Gentileschi. It was the first time in weeks I'd allowed myself to get lost in my own world. Alex walked in, scrolling through his phone. He glanced at the book cover. "More sad stories about old painters?" he asked, not looking up. "You should read something useful, maybe a book on investing." I closed the book without marking my page. The story was broken. I just said maybe. Another time, he came home with a gift. It was a large, abstract painting for the main wall in our living room. It was a chaotic mess of angry red and black slashes. It was also, I knew, by an artist whose work was skyrocketing in value. It was an investment piece. "What do you think?" he asked, beaming with pride. "It's a great asset. It'll be worth double in 5 years." He wanted me to use my hobby to validate his purchase. "It's bold," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Your art history opinion?" he prompted, a smug little smile on his face. "My opinion," I said quietly, "is that you didn't buy it because you love it. You bought it because you think it will make you money. It's not art to you. It's a stock certificate." His smile vanished. "That's the problem with your art world. It's all just feelings and no common sense. At least I'm making it work for us." He turned and walked away, and the ugly painting hung on our wall like a monument to everything we didn't share. It was a daily reminder that in his world, even beauty had to have a price tag. If it couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet, it didn't exist. My isolation felt complete. My friends, most of them married to men like Alex, didn't understand. "He's a great provider, Makla," my friend Sarah told me over lunch. "All men are a little clueless sometimes. You have to pick your battles." But this wasn't a battle. It was a quiet, slow execution of my spirit. The financial control was the cage that kept me in place. Alex managed all our finances from a joint account that I rarely looked at. He transferred a generous allowance to my personal account each month for groceries, clothes, and what he called whatever else you need. The phrase itself was infantilizing. It implied my needs were simple, trivial. One afternoon, I found a job listing online. It was a part-time position as a research assistant at the city's main art museum. The pay was modest, but the work was exactly what I was trained to do: provenance research, helping to trace the history and ownership of pieces in their collection. My heart beat faster just reading the description. It felt like a lifeline. I waited for what I thought was a good moment, a few days later when Alex was in a relaxed mood after closing a big deal. We were having dinner, and the mood felt lighter than it had in months. "I saw an interesting job opening," I began, trying to sound casual. "At the museum. It's part-time doing research." He put his fork down. "A job? Why would you need a job?" "It's not about needing one," I explained gently. "It's something I'd love to do. It's what my degree is in. I miss it." He stared at me, a look of profound disbelief on his face. "Makla, let's be realistic. The pay for something like that is probably a joke. You'd barely cover the cost of gas and new clothes for work. It makes no financial sense." "It's not about the money, Alex. It's for me. For my mind, my happiness." He actually scoffed. "Your happiness? Are you not happy? Look at this house. Look at the life we have. I work 60 hours a week to provide this for you, and you're telling me you're not happy." He was twisting my words, turning my desire for fulfillment into an attack on his provision. "Of course I appreciate everything," I said, my voice faltering, "but I feel like I've lost a part of myself." "That's ridiculous," he said, his voice hardening. "It's a waste of time. Your time is more valuable here supporting me, making sure our life runs smoothly so I can focus on my job. That is your job." He picked up his fork and took a bite of food, a clear signal that the conversation was over. He had vetoed my life. I didn't bring it up again. Years began to pass like this, blurring into a monotonous sequence of seasons. I grew quieter. The vibrant, passionate woman I had once been was now just a faint echo, a ghost in the machine of our perfect life. I hosted his dinner parties. I managed the house. I wore the right clothes and smiled at the right people, and I died a little bit every day. The framed degree stayed in the closet, gathering dust. Sometimes, when Alex was away on a business trip, I would take it out. I'd run my fingers over the embossed seal, remembering the girl who earned it. It felt like looking at a photograph of a dead friend. My world had shrunk to the size of our house. His had expanded to encompass the globe. He was promoted to vice president. His name appeared in financial journals. He was more successful, more confident, and more dismissive of me than ever. He was a star, and I was just the dark, empty space that made his light seem brighter. Then came the night of his big award ceremony. He was being named Financier of the Year by a prestigious industry magazine. It was the pinnacle of his career so far. The event was held in a massive, opulent ballroom downtown. Hundreds of people in tuxedos and gowns milled around, their laughter echoing off the marble columns. I stood by his side in a dress he had chosen, a smile cemented on my face. He was in his element, accepting congratulations, shaking hands, radiating power. I was just another one of his assets, like his expensive watch or his Italian shoes. He went up to the stage to accept his award. The applause was deafening. He stood at the podium, bathed in a golden spotlight, and began his speech. He thanked his mentors, his team, his colleagues, and then he looked directly at me. "And finally," he said, his voice thick with practiced emotion, "I have to thank my beautiful wife, Makala. She's the rock that keeps our home life grounded, the one who handles everything behind the scenes so I can focus on the important things. I couldn't have done any of this without her unwavering support. This is for you, honey." He held up the heavy glass trophy. The crowd erupted in another round of applause. People turned to look at me, their faces full of admiration for this perfect, supportive wife. I smiled and brought my hands together, clapping along with them. But inside, I felt nothing. Not pride, not love, not even the familiar sting of humiliation, just a vast, cold, and terrifying emptiness. He wasn't praising me. He was defining me. He was telling the world that my only value was in my utility to him. I was the maid, the manager, the silent, smiling support system for his grand ambitions. My own ambitions didn't exist. I looked at him up on that stage, a conquering hero in his own story, and for the first time I saw him with perfect, chilling clarity. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of me. He loved the role I played. That's when I realized he hadn't just mocked my degree. He had tried to erase the person who earned it. And in that cold, empty ballroom, under the gaze of 100 strangers, that person finally started to fight her way back to the surface. The car ride home was silent. Not the tense, angry silence we'd grown accustomed to, but a new kind of silence. It was hollow and vast, like the ballroom after the lights had been turned off. Alex drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console. He was humming softly, a tuneless, self-satisfied sound. The glow of the streetlights washed over his face, illuminating a small, smug smile. He was still on stage, still accepting his award. I stared out my window at the city blurring past. The buildings were just streaks of light and shadow. I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. "You were very quiet tonight," he finally said, his voice smooth and content. "I was listening," I replied. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, distant. "Good speech, right? Hit all the right notes." Acknowledged the team, a little humor, a little humility. He chuckled. "The part about you was a nice touch," I thought. "The wives love that stuff." He thought he was explaining a magic trick to a child. The trick of appearing to have a soul. It was a touch, I agreed. He glanced over, sensing something was off, but he was too high on his own success to properly diagnose it. He probably chalked it up to me being tired or emotional. He always did. "You'll have to get that trophy engraved for the mantelpiece," he said, changing the subject back to himself. "Right next to the photos from the wedding." The trophy and the wedding photos, the two great symbols of my designated role, the wife, the supporter, the silent partner whose only job was to applaud. That night, I didn't just lie awake. I lay in the dark and felt a profound internal shift, like the tectonic plates of my own identity were grinding into a new formation. The hurt was gone, the shame had evaporated. In their place was a cold, hard clarity. He hadn't just tried to erase me, he had succeeded. For years, and I had let him. The next morning, I made a promise to myself. It wasn't a loud, dramatic vow. It was a quiet, unshakable resolution that settled deep in my bones. I would find my way back. The first step was small. While Alex was in the shower, I went to my study. I opened the closet door, the scent of cedar and mothballs spilling out. I reached behind the heavy winter coats and pulled out the old portfolio case. My fingers trembled slightly as I unzipped it. There it was, my master's degree. The parchment was cool and heavy in my hands. I read my own name, the name of the university, the title of my thesis. It felt like an artifact from a lost civilization. I didn't put it back in the frame. That felt too final, too visible. Instead, I slid it into the top drawer of my desk, beneath a stack of blank stationery. It was a secret I was keeping, a hidden source of strength. Just knowing it was there made the air in the room feel different. Lighter. My plan began to form that day, not as a grand design, but as a series of small, logical steps. Alex's greatest weapon against me was my perceived incompetence in his world. He had said it himself. God forbid she has to balance a checkbook. He saw me as a financial child. It was time for me to grow up. I spent the next few days in a flurry of quiet activity. I used the household budget, the money he gave me for groceries and upkeep, and I became ruthless with it. I found coupons. I switched to generic brands. I learned to make our coffee at home instead of buying it from the expensive cafe downstairs. Every dollar I saved, I skimmed. It wasn't much at first. $20 here, $50 there, but it felt like a fortune. It was the first money that was truly mine, earned through my own ingenuity, not given as a benevolent gift. 2 weeks after the awards ceremony, I walked into a bank several neighborhoods away, a place Alex would never go. I used the cash I'd saved to open a new account in my name only. The bank teller was a kind, middle-aged woman who didn't ask any questions. Leaving the bank that day, with a new debit card tucked into a secret pocket in my purse, I felt a thrill of independence I hadn't experienced in years. It was a small, secret rebellion, but it was a start. My days took on a new rhythm. On the surface, nothing had changed. I was still the perfect wife. I made sure the house was immaculate, that dinner was ready when Alex came home, that his shirts were perfectly pressed. I played my role with more precision than ever before, but my mind was elsewhere. After he left for work, my real day began. I turned my study into my classroom. I started with the absolute basics. Online courses on personal finance, budgeting, and investing for beginners. I devoured them. The language that had once seemed so intimidating, assets, liabilities, equity, diversification, began to make sense. It was just another language, like the academic jargon of art history. And I had always been good with languages. At night, I would lie in bed next to Alex, listening to his steady breathing. As soon as he was sound asleep, I would slip out of the room and go back to my study. With only the light of my laptop screen illuminating my face, I would spend hours reading, learning, taking notes. The house was silent, the city was asleep, and I was slowly, methodically rebuilding myself from the inside out. Alex remained completely oblivious. He saw my frugality not as a strategy, but as a charming new quirk. "Cutting back on the lattes, are we?" he'd say with a patronizing smile when he saw the new coffee machine. "Good for you, honey, saving us a few bucks." He had no idea I was saving myself. Months turned into a year. My secret bank account grew steadily. My knowledge grew exponentially. I moved past the basics and into the complex world of corporate finance, market analysis, and valuation models. I learned to read a balance sheet the way I used to read a painting, searching for the story hidden beneath the surface numbers. I found I had a talent for it. The same skills I had honed for years as an art historian were surprisingly applicable. Provenance research, tracing a painting's ownership through centuries, wasn't so different from tracing a company's financial history, looking for inconsistencies and hidden debts. Connoisseurship, the ability to spot a forgery by noticing a single anachronistic brushstroke, was like spotting the subtle signs of fraud in a quarterly report. Alex had mocked my degree, but my degree had trained my mind to see patterns, to think critically, and to find value where others saw none. He thought my education was useless because it didn't generate an immediate profit. He never understood that its true value was in how it had taught me to think. That was the year I started investing my small, secret fund. I was conservative at first, putting my money into low-risk index funds. But as my confidence grew, I started making small, calculated bets on companies I had researched meticulously. I made mistakes. I lost money on one of my first trades and felt a sickening knot of panic in my stomach. But I didn't give up. I studied my mistake, learned from it, and moved on. Slowly, my small nest egg began to grow. It was still nothing compared to Alex's wealth, but it was mine. It was a tangible measure of my progress, of the new person I was becoming. The change in me was internal, but eventually, small cracks began to show on the surface. We were at another dinner party, a year and a half after the awards ceremony. It was the same crowd, the same conversations. Alex was holding court, talking about a recent market downturn. "It's a bloodbath out there," he was saying, a little too gleefully. "Only the strong will survive, the weak are getting wiped out." David, the partner who had once asked about my degree, looked grim. "My portfolio is down 20%. I'm thinking of pulling everything out and just waiting for it to bottom out." Before I could stop myself, I spoke. "That might be a mistake," I said quietly. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. It was the first time I had ever offered an opinion on such a topic. Alex looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "Makla, what are you talking about?" I took a steadying breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked directly at David. "There's a concept called dollar-cost averaging. If you believe in the long-term health of the market, a downturn is a buying opportunity, not a reason to sell. You're essentially buying assets at a discount." I continued, my voice gaining confidence. "And based on the historical data for this kind of correction, the recovery period is usually 6 to 8 months. Selling now just locks in your losses." Silence. David stared at me, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. I hadn't thought of it that way. Alex laughed, a forced, uncomfortable sound. "My wife, the financial expert. She reads an article online and suddenly she's a Wall Street guru." He tried to turn it into a joke, just like he had with my degree. But this time, it didn't work. The condescension was still there, but it was laced with a new, subtle note of confusion. He didn't understand where this had come from. I didn't argue. I just gave a small, polite smile and took a sip of my water. The seed of doubt had been planted. That night, for the first time, he was the one who lay awake while I slept. I could feel his eyes on me in the dark. The final piece of my preparation fell into place almost by accident. Alex had been consumed for months with a new, massive project: the acquisition of a century-old, family-run luxury goods company called Devuro. Devuro was a dinosaur. It was famous for its quality but had failed to adapt to the modern market. Its profits were plummeting, and it was drowning in debt. Alex's firm saw an opportunity to buy it for cheap, strip it for parts, and sell off the profitable divisions. He talked about it incessantly, leaving confidential files and reports spread out on his home office desk. He was so confident in my disinterest that he never bothered to hide them. One evening, while he was on a conference call, I wandered into his office. A thick prospectus for the Devuro acquisition lay open on his desk. I idly flipped through the pages, looking at the breakdown of assets. There was a section on miscellaneous holdings, which included real estate, vintage vehicles, and a line item that made my breath catch in my throat. Corporate art collection, estimated value, $500,000. An appendix provided a cursory list of the collection. It was a dry, uninspired inventory. Dutch landscape, 17th C, artist unknown. Italian portrait, 16th C, school of Titian. Still life with flowers, 18th C, attributed to Van Huysum. Alex's analysts had clearly hired a general appraiser who had looked at the paintings as if they were old furniture. The valuation was based on auction records for generic works from those periods. It was a lazy, dismissive assessment, but I knew better. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I was back in my study, my laptop open, my old university textbooks spread around me. I was cross-referencing the scant details from the inventory with academic databases and digital museum archives. My fingers flew across the keyboard. My mind, dormant for so long, felt electric. I was back in my element. This was my world. By dawn, I had found it. The Dutch landscape, 17th C, artist unknown, had a unique composition. A specific way the light fell on the clouds, that was an unmistakable signature. It was an early, lost work by Jacob van Ruysdael. I found a preparatory sketch for it in a German museum's online archive. A similar piece had sold for over $3 million just last year. The Italian portrait from the school of Titian? I found a mention of it in a letter from a 19th century art dealer, describing it as a genuine Titian that had been lost after the family who owned it fled a war. One by one, I uncovered the truth. The Devuro collection wasn't a dusty assortment of forgotten decorations. It was a treasure trove of lost masterpieces. The analysts had missed it. The appraisers had missed it. Alex had missed it. They saw a liability, something to be sold off in a bulk auction for a pittance. I saw its real value. My conservative estimate put the collection's worth at closer to $20 million, maybe more. Alex was planning to buy the company for $50 million. He had no idea that nearly half its value was hanging on the walls, completely misidentified. I closed my laptop as the first rays of sun began to stream through the window. A profound calm settled over me. All those nights spent studying finance, all those years I'd spent studying art, it had all led to this single, crystallizing moment. He had built his kingdom on numbers and brute force. He had mocked my world of beauty and history, but I had just found the bridge between them, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. That's when I realized I wasn't just building an escape plan. I was building a different future, and he had just shown me exactly how to fund it. The air in my study felt charged, electric with the secret I now held. It was no longer a room of escape. It was a command center. For 2 days, I did nothing but work. I barely slept. I lived on coffee and the fierce, burning energy of my purpose. I compiled my research into a flawless, professional prospectus. I created charts, cited sources, and built a valuation model that was as rigorous as anything Alex's firm could produce. I left no room for doubt. The document was my declaration of independence. When it was finished, I printed a single copy. I put on a simple, elegant business suit I'd bought with my own secret money months ago, something Alex had never seen. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the ghost who had drifted through this house for years. Her eyes were clear and focused. She looked like a woman who knew her own worth. I called David's direct line at the firm. I used my maiden name. "Mr. David Sterling, please. Makela Evans calling." There was a pause. His assistant was likely confused. I was no one, but something in my tone must have conveyed importance. He came on the line a moment later, his voice cautious. "David Sterling." "David," I said, my voice steady and cool. "We met at Alex's home. I'm his wife, Makela. I have a time-sensitive investment opportunity I need to discuss with you. In person. And in complete confidence." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his surprise and suspicion. I could picture him in his high-rise office, leaning back in his leather chair, trying to figure out the angle. "Makela," he finally said, "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," I said. "I'm not asking for a favor. I'm offering you a chance to recoup your recent losses and then some. Can you meet me in 1 hour?" The coffee shop on the corner of Grove and 10th. It was a neutral location, far from his world and mine. I think it was the sheer audacity of the call that hooked him. He agreed. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in a quiet corner. I ordered a black coffee and laid the simple, unbound prospectus on the table in front of me. When David walked in, he looked tense and uncertain. He saw me and his expression softened slightly into one of confusion. "Makela," he said, sitting down, "what is this all about? Is Alex okay?" "Alex is fine," I said calmly. "This isn't about him. It's about Devereaux." His eyes widened slightly. "The acquisition, Alex is handling that. It's a done deal practically." "It's a bad deal," I said, sliding the prospectus across the table. "For his firm and for his investors. He's about to leave at least $15 million on the table, possibly more." David stared at the document, then back at me. He didn't touch it. "What are you talking about? His team did a full valuation." "It's a dying company." "His team valued the inventory," I corrected him. "They didn't value the art. They didn't have the expertise." I opened the prospectus to the relevant page, where I had placed high-resolution images of the paintings next to their proper attributions and recent auction records for comparable works. "This," I said, pointing to the Ruisdael, "is not an unknown Dutch landscape. It's a lost masterpiece. This," I pointed to the Titian, "is not school of. It's the genuine article. I have the provenance research to back it up." He finally picked up the papers. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock and then to a dawning, rapacious excitement. He was a businessman, and he was looking at a gold mine that everyone else had mistaken for a pile of rocks. He looked up at me, his gaze sharp and calculating. The kind eyes were gone, replaced by the predator's focus I'd seen so many times before. But this time it was aimed with me, not at me. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his voice low. Why not just tell Alex? I met his gaze without flinching. Because Alex would thank me for the tip, absorb the profit into his firm, and call my contribution an expensive hobby. He would see the value of the paintings, but he would never see the value in the person who found them. I paused, letting the truth of that statement settle between us. I'm not looking for a thank you, David. I'm looking for a partner. I want to buy Devuro. I have a plan to dissolve the failing retail divisions and restructure the company around its most valuable and most overlooked assets. Its heritage and its art. I'm forming an investment group to make a counteroffer. I'm inviting you to be the first member. He was silent for a long time, his fingers drumming on the table. He was weighing the risk. Betraying his star partner versus the promise of an incredible profit. For a man like David, it wasn't a difficult choice. How do I know you can do this? He asked. This is a different world, Makla. You're right, I said. It's my world. Alex and his team know how to read a spreadsheet. I know how to read history. And right now, history is where the real money is. He closed the prospectus and pushed it back toward me. He leaned forward, a slow smile spreading across his face. Tell me more about this investment group. That was the beginning. My company, which I legally registered as the Athena Heritage Group, was born. With David's capital and connections, we brought in two other discreet investors who were tired of Alex's arrogant, high-risk style. My secret bank account, which had once felt like a fortune, became the seed money for the legal fees. The rest was their capital. But the expertise, the strategy, the entire thesis of the investment, that was all mine. I was the managing partner. We submitted our offer for Devuro 1 week before Alex's deal was set to close. Our offer was 10% higher than his. Alex was furious. He came home that night like a thunderstorm, slamming his briefcase on the hall table. The sound made me jump. You will not believe the nerve of some people, he raged, pacing the living room. Some anonymous little shell company just came out of the woodwork and put in a competing bid for Devuro. After all my work. Who the hell are these people? I was in the kitchen, calmly chopping vegetables for dinner. My hands were perfectly steady. What will you do? I asked, my voice even. I'll crush them, he spat. I'll up the bid, I'll bleed them dry. They have no idea who they're messing with. He didn't even look at me. It never, in a million years, would have occurred to him that I could be involved. I was part of the furniture. I was the silent, smiling wallpaper of his life. The bidding war began. Alex would raise his offer. We would calmly counter it the next day with a slightly higher one. It drove him insane. They're not rational, he'd shout into his phone. This company isn't worth this much. The numbers don't add up. He was right. The numbers on his spreadsheet didn't add up. He was blind to the real value, and his pride wouldn't let him even consider that his initial assessment could have been flawed. He became obsessed, consumed by the fight. He saw it as a personal insult, an attack on his reputation. He stopped sleeping. He was volatile and angry, barking at his assistants, snapping at me. Through it all, I played my part. I made his dinner. I listened to his rants. I would murmur sympathetic things like, "That sounds so frustrating, dear." Inside, I felt a cold, clear sense of purpose. I was watching the slow, methodical dismantling of an empire, and I was the one pulling the levers. Finally, Alex went too far. In a desperate, arrogant move, he leveraged his firm to its absolute limit, placing a massive, final offer that was nearly double the company's initial valuation. He was convinced it would finally scare off his mysterious rival. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. That afternoon, I instructed our lawyers to withdraw our bid. Alex was triumphant. He came home that evening, his face flushed with victory. He was giddy, pouring champagne, celebrating his hard-won battle. "I told you I'd crush them," he said, handing me a glass. "They're gone, vanished. They didn't have the stomach for a real fight. Devuro is ours." I took a small sip of the champagne. It tasted like ash. "Congratulations," I said. He had just paid $100 million for a company that was, without the art, worth less than 30. He had saddled his firm with a mountain of debt to acquire a failing business, all because his ego couldn't stand to lose. The next phase of my plan was quiet. Over the next 2 months, the truth about the Devuro acquisition began to ripple through the financial world. The company was a lemon. Its debt was a black hole. Alex's firm started posting catastrophic losses. Investors began to pull their money out. the stock price plummeted. The financial journalists who had once praised him were now writing articles questioning his judgment. His Financier of the Year award was starting to look like a joke. David and the other partners, shielded from the fallout because I had gotten them to divest before the final bid, began to distance themselves from Alex. They called for an emergency board meeting. The day of the meeting, the house was silent. Alex stood in front of the hall mirror, adjusting his tie. His hands were shaking. The confidence had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out man, brittle with fear. "It's a witch hunt," he muttered to his reflection. "They're looking for a scapegoat." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in our marriage. "You know how hard I work, right, Makla? You know I did this for us." "I know," I said softly. He left. I spent the day packing. I didn't take much. My clothes, my books, the few personal items that hadn't been chosen by him. I walked through the cold, gray house one last time. I paused in front of the ugly abstract painting on the living room wall, his great asset. It looked ridiculous now, a monument to his blindness. On the mantelpiece, his glass trophy gleamed. I picked it up. It was heavy and cold. I placed it back down, dead center, where he would be sure to see it. Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. The final meeting took place a week later in the sterile conference room of a downtown law firm. My divorce lawyer sat beside me. Alex and his lawyer sat opposite. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit seemed to hang off him. His lawyer cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to be generous in the settlement. He recognizes the years you have dedicated to the marriage." "That won't be necessary," my lawyer said, sliding a folder across the polished table. "My client is waiving her right to any and all marital assets. She asks for nothing." Alex stared at me, his mouth slightly open. This was not part of the script. The wife was supposed to fight for her share of the spoils. He couldn't comprehend why I would walk away from the money he had always used to define my worth. "However," my lawyer continued, "there is the matter of my client's own business, the Athena Heritage Group." Alex's head snapped up. A flicker of dawning horror crossed his face. What is that?" "It's an investment firm," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm and clear. "We specialize in undervalued cultural assets. You might know us as the company that was bidding against you for Devereux." The color drained from his face. He looked like he had been physically struck. He stared at me, his mind racing, connecting the dots, replaying the last few months in a sickening new light. His rants, my calm replies, my quiet presence. "You," he whispered. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "No, you couldn't have." "Your mistake," I said, my voice devoid of any anger, "was that you never saw me. You saw a hobby. You saw a wife. You saw a support system. You never saw a person with a mind of her own." His lawyer was shuffling through the papers, his own expression turning grim. Alex was still staring at me, his world collapsing in real time. "But the money," he stammered. "Where did you get the money?" "I found investors who recognized a good opportunity when they saw one," I said. "People who value expertise over ego." Silence hung in the room. He finally understood. The full scope of his humiliation was laid bare. He hadn't been beaten by a rival. He had been beaten by the woman he dismissed as a financially illiterate child. The adorable little degree he had mocked had become the instrument of his downfall. He finally broke. "This is our life, Makla. Our money, you betrayed me." "No, Alex," I said, standing up. "You betrayed yourself. You were so busy looking for threats from the outside that you never realized the biggest one was sitting right across the dinner table from you, year after year, just waiting for you to see her." My lawyer gathered our things. We walked to the door. "Wait," Alex said, his voice cracking. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked. It was the desperate question of a king who had just lost his kingdom. I finally turned to look at him. He was a broken man, stripped of his pride and his power. All that was left was the raw, pathetic fear. "I don't know, Alex," I said softly. "You're the one with the degree in finance. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I walked out of that room and didn't look back. The next few months were a blur of focused work. I took the helm of the new, restructured Devereux. We sold off the unprofitable parts of the business. My investors were rewarded handsomely. My first act as CEO was to hire a team of top conservators and art historians to restore and properly catalog the art collection. I spent my days in a world of beauty and history, my mind alive and engaged. My office was in the old Devereux Mansion, a beautiful historic building. The first thing I hung on my wall was my master's degree in a new, elegant frame. It hung right behind my desk, a silent testament to the journey I had taken. About a year later, my assistant told me I had a visitor, a man who had shown up without an appointment. It was Alex. I agreed to see him. He was led into my office. He looked older, diminished. He was wearing a suit that was a little too big, a little less expensive. I learned he had lost his job, his reputation, and most of his money. The house had been sold to cover his debts. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, his eyes darting around, taking in the grand desk, the high ceilings, and finally, the framed degree on the wall behind me. A flicker of something regret, shame crossed his face. "Makela," he began, his voice raspy, "you've done well." "I have," I said simply. I didn't offer him a seat. He wrung his hands. "I've been trying to get back on my feet. It's hard. The market's tough. No one wants to take a chance on me." I just listened. "I was thinking," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with a desperate, humiliating hope. "You're building something here. You need good people. People who understand finance. I know I made mistakes, but I'm good at what I do. I could help you." And there it was, the moment the story had been building toward for years. The man who mocked my education, who called my life's work a hobby, who told me my only job was to support him, was standing in my office, asking me for a job. The poetic justice was so perfect, so complete, that it felt less like triumph and more like the quiet, inevitable closing of a circle. I looked at him, at this ghost from a former life, and I felt a surprising wave of nothing. Not anger, not pity, just a calm, final sense of release. The hold he'd had on me for so long was completely gone. "I'm sorry, Alex," I said, and my voice was gentle but firm. "But there are no positions available for you here." He seemed to shrink. He nodded slowly, the last bit of hope draining from his face. "I understand." He turned and walked out of my office. I watched him go, and then I turned back to the work on my desk. That's what I learned. Respect can't be bought, and it can't be demanded. It has to be earned. Not from others, but from yourself. I had spent so many years waiting for him to value me, when the only person I needed to convince was myself. The revenge wasn't in his ruin. It was in my resurrection. I stopped waiting for his apology because I realized his opinion no longer mattered. Peace, I finally understood, was mine to give. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe. More true-to-life tales of courage, family, and quiet revenge await here. Thank you for listening.